Good afternoon and welcome to the PSTE Subcommittee. We are here to hear 3 budgets today, and we're going to go in the following order: DPSCS Division of Pretrial Detention and Services, then the Public Service Commission, then the Office of People's Counsel. So to start, we have Jacob Cash, our analyst for DPSCS. Jacob, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Jacob Cash. I'm a policy analyst for the Department of Legislative Services. Today, I'll be providing the budget analysis for the Division of Pretrial Detention and Services, or DPDS. DPDS differs from the correctional function of state government because it operates the 6 facilities that make up the Baltimore City local jail complex and functions such as arrest booking, pretrial release, and serving juveniles served as adults, or charged as adults, excuse me. If you join me on the cover page, you can see that the fiscal 2025 allowance for this agency is $272 million, which is a 7% decrease of $20.6 million. Beginning with the performance evaluation and a discussion on population and caseloads, on page 4, Exhibit 1 shows the number of arrestees processed at Baltimore Central Booking, commitments processed to pretrial detention, and the rate of commitment. Arrests and commitments both increased in fiscal 2023, and those increases did lead to an increase in local detainee average daily population, which is shown in Exhibit 2 on page 5. The federal detainee population at the Chesapeake Detention Facility is being downsized, which created a net reduction in overall pretrial offenders held in Baltimore City. Sentenced offender populations in these facilities also increased back up to fiscal 2021 levels, but they're lower than the pre-pandemic levels. The average length of stay is now under 3 months for these facilities compared to 13.2 months during the height of the pandemic. Assault trends are discussed on page 6. Exhibit 3 shows the number of assaults as calculated using DPSCS Managing for Results and average daily population data. There was an overall reduction in assaults from the peak in fiscal 2022, but that reduction was caused mostly by the trends at Central Booking. The Maryland Reception Diagnostic and Classification Center, or MRDCC, as well as CDF and the Youth Detention Center are experiencing increased assaults, primarily in the Youth Detention Center. Assaults on staff also decreased on the whole by 15%, but MRDCC did see an increase in staff assaults. Additionally, there was 1 homicide reported in DPDS facilities in fiscal 2023 with investigations ongoing, and there was 1 homicide also reported in fiscal 2022. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows PRSP intake trends, so the pretrial release service program, and investigation workloads. The rate of investigation has been lower since bail reform in fiscal 2017, but the trends are showing an increase in cases now in fiscal 2023, including the first year-to-year increase for pretrial investigations. Exhibit 5 on page 9 shows the performance evaluation for this program. They've met their goals since the MFR measures were established, both for defendants arrested on new charges, as well as those who failed to appear to their court dates. Those decreased in the failure to appear rate decreased in fiscal 2023, while the rate of those arrested on new charges remained unchanged. Moving on to the budget, I'd like to bring your attention to page 10 to discuss proposed deficiency appropriations for fiscal 2024. Since this was approved, there's been an increased need, particularly in electricity and food services, as well as $3.3 million needed to extend this agency's share of the inmate medical contract. Exhibit 6 on page 11 breaks down how the $272 million allowance is allocated. The personnel costs for the agency total $197 million for the 1,789 employees. Inmate medical costs also make up a large share of spending, as well as the other operating costs totaling about $36 million. Those are miscellaneous expenses, including utilities, contractual work, and food. Exhibit 7 shows the proposed budget change from fiscal 2024 to 2025. As I mentioned at the outset, there's a budget reduction of $20.6 million. That reduction is primarily coming from overtime earnings, as you can see in the chart. The reduction in overtime is a substantial departure from their most recent year actuals, which were $48 million in fiscal 2023, but are only budgeted at $24.8 million in fiscal 2025. As I pointed out in the overview analysis, overtime utilization is not reducing so much as to call for this reduction by half. So DLS is asking DPDS to comment on the anticipated decline in overtime spending. Moving on to the personnel section, there's a net reduction of 3 positions from the agency that removes approximately $360,000. The number of vacancies also declined by 64 in 2023. Vacancies are currently highest among entry-level COs. And as a reminder, there's a non-competitive promotion to CO level 2 after 1 year of service. So that results in the need to replace these COs pretty regularly. Among administrative vacancies, the rates are worst among CO dietary, supply, and maintenance officers. And Exhibit 8 on page 14 shows how the vacancies match up by facility. The first issue I'd like to talk about today is regarding a settlement approved by the Board of Public Works for a tragic case of victimization while an individual was in DPDS custody. In this case, the victim was attacked in 2014 and later filed suit against the state, accusing the state of violating his due process rights, use of excessive force, encouraging and covering up the attack, and failing to render aid. The court filing specified that the assault was allowed to occur by a CO who deliberately left cells unlocked in the housing unit to allow a gang-related beating. The jury ruled in favor of Mr. Wallace, who is the plaintiff, and found that the state violated his civil rights, trained their employees negligently, and caused his injuries through negligence. The jury awarded $25 million in damages, including $10 million for the violation of his civil rights and $15 million for negligence. However, the Maryland Tort Claims Act limits the recompense that individuals can seek against the state and reduced that amount to $200,000, which is a reduction of over 99%. Mr. Wallace filed suit again against the state due to this reduction and claimed that the Maryland Tort Claims Act was in violation of his rights. The state avoided this litigation by settling, and that amount of $7 million was approved by the Board of Public Works. This is not the only case where a settlement has been approved by the Board of Public Works for DPSCS, including DPDS. Exhibit 9 on page 16 lists all of those legal cases that have been approved for payment starting with fiscal 2022. In fiscal 2022 and 2023, there were each 9 cases totaling $360,000 in 2022 and $379,000 in 2023. So far in fiscal 2024, so since June, there's been 4 additional cases brought to the Board of Public Works, totaling $182,000, which is on track to reach that same rate in 2023 and 2022. It's important to note that a settlement payment does not represent an admission of guilt or determination of wrongdoing. In most of these cases, I will say that the court found the plaintiff's claims did have merit, and they denied the motions to dismiss from the state. For many of these individuals harmed by DPSCS or employees, there's a years-long wait before they find justice, and the amount is typically only sufficient to afford legal fees. And it's not typically the full amount that would take to make them whole. The process for being made whole is governed by the Maryland Tort Claims Act, which currently limits awards to $400,000 for individuals or $800,000 for cases that might involve more than one individual. And while this Wallace case is no longer bringing into question the constitutionality of this law, there may be limits placed on settlement amounts that are unduly burdensome on those who have been harmed versus those who are doing the harming. Related to these issues of inmate brutality and state accountability, There is a bill under consideration that would create a correctional ombudsman to investigate, review, and assess the administrative actions that DPSES is taking to resolve instances of wrongdoing. The unit may be a beneficial system for preventing similar cases from reaching the Board of Public Works and for creating a sense of trust and justice within the walls. On this issue, DLS is asking DPSES to comment on efforts to improve the administrative remedy process, diligently investigate claims of wrongdoing of employees or others, and maintain the safety of claimants while investigations are conducted, as well as comment on any changes to employee training relevant to the use of force, negligence, retaliation, and preservation of rights. Finally, we're asking DPSES to comment on the pros and cons of this potential correctional ombudsman. The second issue I'd like to talk about today is the Duval v. Hogan consent decree, beginning on page 18. This decree is part of longstanding litigation that originated in the 1970s and has a history of over 741 motions. The most recent consent decree was signed in 2015 at the behest of the ACLU on behalf of the plaintiffs. The agreement included a settlement amount of $450,000, which covered a portion of legal fees. The deadline for complying with the 12 areas and 54 provisions has been extended several times, with the most recent extension lasting until June of this year. The full list of provisions and compliance status can be found in Appendix 2, but in this issue, I'd like to summarize just the changes since last year. Exhibit 10 on page 20 shows those provisions that have either been upgraded or downgraded in compliance. Only one was downgraded from substantial compliance to partial compliance, that being a provision related to custody staff following accommodations by medical staff. So for instance, somebody with that needs crutches would need to be placed on the bottom bunk, but there's many similar accommodations that are needed. Two other areas related to medication refills and renewals were upgraded from non-compliance to partial compliance, and 6 areas were upgraded in the mental health care space from partial compliance to substantial compliance. The department has also been using a new mental health contractor for substance use disorder treatment services, which has helped out in part for these. DLS is pleased that progress has been made, but we're concerned that not enough progress is being made to fully comply with the consent decree. In one of the motions to extend the deadline, the plaintiffs claimed that DPDS failed to achieve substantive compliance, quote, because of their lack of any incentive to do so, end quote. While DPDS used the $750,000 in fiscal 2023 to procure attorneys and experts to reach substantive compliance, they still need to make more progress before this deadline is reached. There was that initial settlement of $450,000, but if they fail to meet this deadline, the case could be reopened and an increased settlement could be assessed on this date. And I would note that the judge has noted in similar cases, higher amounts are typically assessed, and they have expressed frustration with a lack of compliance. On this issue, DLS is asking DPSES to comment on the steps taken in the past year to achieve greater compliance with Duval, including a discussion of the effectiveness of the third-party consultants they've hired. DPSES should also comment on the impending deadline of June 30th, 2024, and address the possibility of future litigation. Finally, the third issue I'd like to talk about today is the Chesapeake Detention Facility, or CDF. CDF has been operated as a federal detention facility since fiscal 2012 due to an agreement with the U.S. Marshal Service that guarantees space in that formerly Supermax facility to be dedicated to federal rather than state or local detainees. The state received $20 million in an upfront payment, and we receive operating reimbursements with a pre-negotiated annual increase. That has been providing funds for CDF since the establishment, but Exhibit 11 on page 22 shows that general funds have also been needed to fully fund this program. Dating back to 2019, a total of $18 million in general funds have been expended. And by fiscal 2025, those general funds are expected to grow to $41 million. As a reminder, the detainment of federally charged individuals is not a state function or priority, yet this agreement in place with the U.S. Marshal Service requires that state resources be diverted to support facility and personnel costs that are not covered by the negotiated reimbursement. On this issue, DLS is asking DPSCS to comment on plans to utilize CDF upon completion of the agreement, as well as discuss strategies to reduce the need for general funds. In conclusion, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and I'm ready to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Jacob. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Jacob, for all the information. I was just looking back at the claims against DPSCS, and I know it goes back to 22, 23, and 24. I didn't know if we could just see maybe the locations, maybe the areas where they were more than others. Possibly, if we could have an answer to that, possibly.
Yeah, I can look a little bit more deeper into that over the interim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jacob, you mentioned that you believe we're overestimating, or the governor's budget overestimates the savings related to reduced overtime. Can you speak a little more to that, please? I just fear that if you are correct, we're going to have some deficiencies.
Right. At least in this agency, it looks like the overtime budget is not as much as they would need. In the overview, I also pointed out department-wide, it seems a little bit short. Okay. I think a portion of the shortfall identified this year for this agency could be diverted from other areas of the department, but it's also possible that they won't have enough to divert, and deficiency might be possible come next session. Okay.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, Madam Secretary, and anybody from your team, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Alfred, members of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I am the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today are Joseph Sadal, Deputy Secretary of Administration, and Annie Harvey, Deputy Secretary of Operations. As always, we appreciate Mr. Cash and our ongoing partnership with the Department of Legislative Services. The analysis contains 4 issues for us to comment on and 1 recommended action. First, the department was asked to comment on the anticipated decline in overtime spending for the division. The department, in conjunction with DVM, monitors all salaries related to spending and has the ability to realign funding as needed. The second issue the department was asked to comment on is the administrative remedy process, training resulting from the Wallace case, and the pros and cons of the correctional ombudsman. I would like to clarify that the administrative remedy process is a process for incarcerated individuals in the Division of Corrections. The Division of Pretrial Detention and Services has its own inmate grievance process available for detainees who raise complaints within that department. These specific details of each process are written in our written response. Regarding changes to the training since Wallace, the department is conducting a comprehensive review of entry-level academy training and is in the process of updating lesson plans, presentations, and the student study guide. With the training, instructors are focusing on the constitutional rights of incarcerated individuals. This includes the right to be protected, the use of force, retaliation, and negligence. Although the circumstances in Wallace pertain to pretrial detainees, the training review and updates will apply across the department. As far as our thoughts on the ombudsman, we simply say that the correctional ombudsman, by the independent nature of their duties, may unintentionally interfere with the mechanisms already established in statute, regulation, and policy. The department is already subject to a thorough and routine internal and external audit by several entities. These include the Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards, the Office of Legislative Audits, and the Office of Performance Evaluation and Government Accountability, as well as various internal units and that investigate and respond to areas of noncompliance. The third issue, which DLS has requested the department comment on, is the progress of Duval. First, I want to stress that achieving Duval compliance is my primary goal during this administration. I have charged the Deputy Secretary Operations to oversee that compliance. There is a multidisciplinary team of professionals overseeing those compliance efforts. This is different from previous administrations. I believe we have made enormous strides towards achieving compliance. It is my hope to be fully compliant in the mental health portion of the agreement within the next 9 months. The Attorney General's office has hired a third-party firm to assist the department in the Duval case. Their review of the case found that the medical monitor was unable to justify many of the decisions and the recommendations that were made. That monitor resigned when questioned about the decisions, and we are currently in the search process for a new compliance monitor. We actually have 5 individual candidates that we're reviewing right now. Once the new monitor is in place, the department's Duval Council believes we will be in substantial compliance with all paragraphs of the medical portion of the agreement within the next year. I'm incredibly proud of everything my team is doing to come into compliance with this settlement agreement. Moving on to the final issue outlined by DLS, our plans to utilize the Chesapeake Detention Facility upon completion of the current agreement with the United States Marshals Service, and any strategies to reduce the need for general funds. At this time, the department fully anticipates that the agreement with USMS will be continued. My team is currently working to negotiate a modification to the current agreement, increasing the per diem amount that USMS pays. This will bring CDF closer to self-sufficiency and lessen the need for general funds. Lastly, DLS analysts concur with the governor's allowance, and we agree with the recommendation. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was good to see you, Secretary.
You as well.
A couple of quick questions. You mentioned the training and under issue 2, where you would ensure that all the correctional officers, does that also include your management staff on the civilian side as well?
Absolutely. We are looking
Thank
at
you.
our leadership training academy as well, our first line supervisor academy, as well as the regular in-service and the regular academy that we
Thank you very much. And the transition, the anticipation of the U.S. Marshal Services being continued at CDF, the transition, you said you were in process of negotiations right now?
So actually prior to Mr. Hughes leaving, who was in charge of the U.S. Marshal, we did have a very large meeting. We're now working with Mr. Harris there because I was met personally with them, and we are increasing the capacity that they have at CDF. Right now, they have about 230 housing abilities to use. We increased it to 388, which gives them greater capacity to allow them to bring more individuals closer to the Baltimore area so that they can get to their federal court. And that indeed will help us generate additional revenues there.
Okay, will that increase that increasing, and that's terrific, by the way, that they will be self-sustaining soon. But what strength will the negotiated contract help you with your enhancement of personnel as well, if you're increasing the numbers?
So our personnel levels are going to remain the same, but we look annually at that staffing level.
Okay.
So we'll look at that staffing level to ensure that it is conducive to that increase that we
Gotcha.
have.
All right, thank you. And I think that's it right now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for all the information, Secretary.
Yeah.
We really appreciate this. Seeing that this bill that they're looking at for correction ombudsman, and knowing at times we have too much government and it doesn't help that at times. But at the same time, having somebody independent that would be a benefit sometimes to not make a decision, but be a part of decision at times would be a help. I'm seeing that you're someone not for that. But at times they are a benefit for investigations, reviews, and assessments. And maybe they can make a difference. Is that something maybe that you could possibly look at? I mean, I again, I'll say this, that's too much government. I don't like that at times. I don't think we all do, but I think at a time that we see some of the issues of happening to the people that are incarcerated, maybe there's somebody else that could also be a part of that puzzle that maybe be a help.
So thank you for that comment. And just so, if you're not familiar, we already do that externally. When there is a very sensitive case that we feel as though an outside entity needs to actually look at, we reach out to our partners at Maryland State Police and other law enforcement entities. And they work with us and they actually conduct that investigation for us.
Okay, well, thank you. And I, the reason why I asked for locations, I think it's important to know maybe where we have more of a problem that we can assist or help for some critical things that are happening, for cases that are happening or claims. And if we can know those things, maybe you need more help that we don't know that. But
Yeah.
knowing that, I think is in the help for you.
It is, but I think you'd be very mindful too that we're talking about pretrial detention and services.
Yes.
So the individuals that we are handling at this level are a lot more critical. They're coming off of the street.
Okay.
So because they're coming off the street, their behavior is not as conformed as those that are already sentenced and within the Division of Corrections and know that they're going to be there for a while.
Sure.
Because these individuals anticipate that they're going home.
Yeah.
So the challenges are a lot greater.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Secretary, we're gonna have we have 3 people signed up to give testimony, and I can't anticipate what they're gonna say, but I'm sure it might have something to do with overtime. And you and I have had this conversation privately. We've had the conversation every time you're in front of us. This subcommittee appreciates greatly the progress you've made in terms of filling your vacancy rates, which will overall help with that overtime issue. But I think there's a lot to unpack, and you've been on the job a year. And there's still more work to do. I think everybody can appreciate that. Two questions after having met with some of the folks who might be coming to give comment today. Do you ever perform, either at the facilities we're discussing today or other facilities under DPSCS, do you ever perform surprise spot checks where the facility doesn't know that you and your leadership team are coming, but it can give you a kind of better sense of how things run day to day without maybe all the attention that
All the
announcing
time.
it? Okay.
I live in the field
Okay.
all the time. Yes, I'm in the field more than I'm in my office. So
Okay.
yes, I'm out there.
Okay, but surprise where you don't tell the.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
My
And
deputy doesn't even know the time I'm coming.
correct.
And they're calling her saying, did you know the secretary's here? And I'm in Western Maryland somewhere or on
Okay.
the shore. So yes, I do that frequently.
That's a very healthy leadership style. I appreciate that. Anything you've learned from those spot checks?
No, I think I have the appreciation already for the staff because I've grown up in this environment, but it allows me to actually see, especially where they have special assignment posts, when you start to talk about overtime and overtime drivers, the need to look at the necessity of those posts and whether they need to become budgeted or not, and to look to see how the actual institution is performing at the time.
Mhm.
Does it have a calm environment or is there something else going on? And that's the advantage of being able to just pop up.
Right. Okay. And then related to that, do you ever meet with COs or staff without their supervisors, just a one-on-one with you and the staff without, so folks can have a more candid conversation
I will
with
tell you that they email me all day and all night, 4 a.m. in the
Yeah.
morning. I respond. I've had Zoom meetings individual.
Okay.
Many of them know me because I've been out there and I've grown up with them. So
Yeah.
yes, I have.
Okay. Again, not related to this particular budget, but I would appreciate you doing that I've just met with some members from ECI and would appreciate, I know they would appreciate a meeting with you without supervisors and just to have that kind of candid conversation about
Absolutely.
challenges. I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you. And I appreciate you doing spot checks.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you to you and your team.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, we have 3 individuals signed up to give testimony, Ms. Givens, Ms. Francis, and Ms. Owens, and we have 3 seats, so you may all come up at the same time, and we have. Thank you. We follow full committee rules, which is about 2 minutes per testimony. If you could try to stick to that, we'd appreciate it.
Good morning. I guess I'll start. No problem. Good afternoon. My name is Corporal Linda Owens, and I work for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services pretrial as a correctional officer in Baltimore City, MRDCC. I am also a member of the staffing analysis team for ASME. We toured every correctional institution in the state of Maryland and all 3 shifts. We interviewed custody and non-custody personnel. Unlike the Moss Group report, we delivered a post-by-post analysis that revealed the following: extreme short staffing that caused officers to work multiple posts, putting themselves and incarcerated individuals in danger, high amounts of mandatory overtime, sometimes exceeding 16 hours, alarming vacancies for supervisors, CO1s, CO2s, CO3s, staffing plans that were not up to date, operational staffing levels changing from shift to shift without approval from administrators, the removal of pens from DPSCS institutions to include transportation units, the need for existing pens to be used and more pens to be added to increase staffing, special assignment posts being used long-term instead of being converted to established posts. Most importantly, we found an overwhelming lack of morale due to personal sacrifices made by officers daily, consequently jeopardizing our family life and mental wellness. For myself, I'm 53 years old. I've worked for corrections for over 2 decades. I'm a widow and a mother of 5. I take care of elderly parents, one who has recently deceased. I have a 19-year-old son in my home with autism. I've sacrificed promotions because it doesn't make sense to take on more responsibility and get paid less than a subordinate. I hope you take all these issues in consideration while you contemplate our budget. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Janiyah Francis. I am a secretary for ASME Local 3661, currently employed in the Bail Review Unit for pretrial. Bail Review provides an unbiased recommendation for detained individuals to uphold the safety of the community and the victims involved. We use verifiable evidence, rap sheets, and other legal documents to provide a calculated determination for the defendant's bail status while they pen trial. Despite our crucial role, we're often disregarded and left without necessary resources required to service our community. We provide necessary information that all professionals, their clients, and community members depend on our team to disclose. We lack flexibility since we only have desktop computers. This affects the accuracy and quality of the data requested of us. We currently share printers on multiple floors, have time-sensitive caseloads, and need an adequate budget to obtain the resources such as tablets, laptops, and phones to provide accurate and sustainable data services. Agents monitor individuals and personal phones are defaulted to contact these clients, posing a security risk. Post-hearings, handcuffs are removed from detained individuals. They lobby in a shared hallway awaiting to be housed. We need training to protect ourselves in a correctional institution. All correctional staff, parole and probation agents, monitors, and chaplain staff members have defensive CPR and uniform training systems that provide education on how to protect themselves. We constantly disclose these concerns with management and have seen minimal improvement and the indecency to stay and address our concerns effectively, causing a high turnover rate in our staff. Please consider this when making your determination for the budget. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Linnea Gibbons, and I'm a proud union member of Local 1427. I started my career as a correctional officer with Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services in March of 2021. Currently, I work at a pretrial facility located in Baltimore City. Being a correctional officer is a dangerous job, especially due to staff shortages. We often take shortcuts in the dangerous jobs, we often take shortcuts with security to ensure programs are available to the detainees, risking our safety daily. It is a harsh reality that despite the maximum team effort, some tasks cannot be accomplished within a day due to staff shortages. These include lunch breaks that officers have to skip and incarcerated individuals missing out on programs. The issue is compounded by the fact that correctional officers in our state are not paid enough compared to neighboring states, resulting in an all-time high in resignation and retirement rates. Many experienced officers are leaving state employment to join county corrections, where they start at an entry-level position and earn more than their current salary. To retain our employees, we need to offer competitive salaries and compensation for the dangerous jobs we do in 24/7 institutions. Imagine a workplace where employees are relieved from their duties on time and not hours later, every day, or sometimes not relieved at all. Imagine a workplace where our overtime compensation is allocated towards fulfilling our personal goals. Instead, an amount of forced overtime is going towards childcare. Daycare fees accumulate because of staff shortage and mandated hours beyond the regular shift. State workers must pay out of pocket for childcare that has skyrocketed and can no longer afford to take care of families without a second job, which forces parents to sacrifice time spent with our children as they are being raised by someone else. We should strive to create such a workplace where employees feel valued and supported and where our well-being is a top priority. Let's work towards building an environment where everyone can thrive and grow both personally and professionally.
Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your input. Any questions, Senator Jackson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No questions. Thank you, ladies, for presenting today. Do we have your information in writing? If not, could you please make sure that we get it?
Sure.
Sure.
All right.
No problem.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your service to the state. Okay, thank you, Jacob. And now we will be joined by Samuel Quist for the Public Service Commission, followed by the Office of People's Counsel. Samuel, whenever you're ready.
Thank you and good afternoon. Samuel Quist from the Department of Legislative Services. The fiscal 2025 budget for the Public Service Commission totals $27.9 million, which is an increase of approximately $1.8 million or 6.9% from the fiscal 2024 working appropriation. On page 1 of the analysis, you can see that the budget is primarily specially funded through the Public Utility Regulation Fund, along with a small portion of federal funds as well. On page 2 of the analysis, there are 2 items relating to the fiscal 2024 appropriation I'd like to briefly highlight. The first item is that a budget amendment was recently processed, allocating $500,000 to support consulting costs related to Chapter 95 of 2023, also known as the Power Act. Chapter 95 requires that PSC require that PJM Interconnection conduct a electric transmission system upgrade analysis relating to the build out of offshore wind energy capacity. Furthermore, Chapter 95 requires that during fiscal 2025, PSC or PJM issue a solicitation for proposals related to transmission facility upgrades, as well as working with the Department of General Services to issue a solicitation for a long-term power purchasing agreement related to offshore wind energy from qualified offshore wind projects. Exhibit 1 on page number 3 of the analysis shows an overview of the fiscal 2025 allowance. 77% or $21.6 million covers personnel expenses. The second largest category is $1.9 million or 7% for outside consultants. These include contracts with outside subject matter experts and other consultants that assist PSC staff in proceedings it is involved in. Also in Exhibit 1, this notes that in the fiscal 2025 allowance, there are $1 million of new contractual service costs related to Chapter 95, the bill I just mentioned. Turning to Exhibit 2 on page number 4 for the proposed budget changes. Under personnel expenses, there's a total of an increase of $1.3 million, which include an increase of approximately $600,000, representing the cost of 8 new regular positions that are funded through the budget. 2 of these 8 new positions result from contractual conversions, so there is a corresponding decrease of about $104,000 for contractual personnel expenses. Outside of personnel, the largest change in the budget is the increase in $1 million for the contractual services cost related to Chapter 95 of 2023. Additionally, there is $100,000 of new contractual services costs related to Chapter 652 of 2023, which makes permanent the Community Solar Energy Generating Systems pilot program. Under decreases, the largest decrease in the budget is $400,000 relating to the conclusion of a contract for retail choice customer education materials, which expires at the end of fiscal 2024. On page 6 of the analysis, personnel data is highlighted in greater detail. This includes a breakdown of the 8 new regular positions in the budget. Among these 8, 4 positions are related to Chapter 95 of 2023 for the various purposes related to offshore wind that the bill contains. There are also 2 new positions related to Chapter 652 related to the Community Solar Pilot Program. And the 2 new positions I mentioned previously related to contractual conversions. In total, there are 3 contractual positions that are being converted to 2 new regular positions. So you can see there's a corresponding decrease in the 3 contractual FTEs. Additionally to these new 8 positions, during 2024, the Board of Public Works also created 1 additional position during fiscal 2024. The analysis notes that as of the end of calendar 2023, there were approximately 15 vacant positions, including 4 that had been vacant for over 1 year. And the analysis is asking PSC to comment on efforts to fill those long-term vacant positions, in addition to the new positions in the budget. Turning to the key observation section of the analysis, the first key observation section relates to data that the PSC reports on its website related to utility terminations and arrearages. The first exhibit on page 7 is showing data on residential electricity and natural gas prices, which have continued to rise in calendar 2023. And notably, the average electricity price in Maryland in November 23 rose faster than the U.S. national average. In November of 2023, the average price was 17.4 cents per kilowatt hour in Maryland compared to 16.2 cents from the U.S. national average. Exhibit 4 on page 9 reflects the utility arrearage data reported for the 6 largest utilities in Maryland. As you can see, there's been some fluctuation in recent years. First, during calendar 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, you see that utility arrearages rised rapidly through this period, reaching a height around October of 2020. There was some decrease following this in the summer of 2021, corresponding to the distribution of state arrearage assistance funding. However, there were some increases following that during the end of 2021 into calendar 2022. At the beginning of calendar 2023, utility arrearages rose once again, and in March of 2023 actually reached a peak higher than had been previously achieved during the pandemic in calendar 2020. Exhibit 5 on page number 10, showing details on utility termination data. You can see this follows a roughly cyclical pattern during the year due to the conditions under which a utility may terminate service during the winter heating season. You can see that there was a utility termination moratorium in effect during calendar 2020 during the height of the pandemic. Following this period, utility terminations increased in calendar 21 and 2022. And in 2023 have exceeded the pre-pandemic level shown in calendar 2019. In August of 2023, the number of utility terminations that month reached a 5-year high at 19,228 reported. Exhibit number 2 is related to complaint data against third-party retail energy suppliers. Due to continued interest in this issue by members of the General Assembly, the Joint Chairman's report in 2023 asked PSC to submit a report to the budget committees on this issue. Exhibits 6 and 7 show summaries of the total number of complaints filed against third-party suppliers. Exhibit 6 is annual data from calendar 2018 to 2022. You can see that from 2020 to 2022, the number submitted annually was roughly similar. In calendar 2022, the number was 446 complaints filed. Exhibit 7 is showing a monthly breakdown of this data between January of 2022 and June of 2023. you can see that there's a little bit more fluctuation from month to month, including in January of 23 and February of 23. There was a notable increase there. As a result, PSC launched its maximum enforcement initiative, focusing multi-division collaboration on investigating and responding to these complaints. Exhibit 8 on page 13 is a summary of data that PSC presented on the primary reasons for complaints against third-party suppliers for both electric and gas suppliers between calendar 2018 and 2022. The most common two reasons were slamming, followed by misrepresentation. The PSC defines the issue of slamming as the illegal practice of switching a customer's electric or gas supply service without the customer's permission. A misrepresentation is defined by using false or deceptive marketing practices in an effort to enroll customers. Exhibit 9 on page 14 is a summary of the 10 zip codes in Maryland, which had the highest concentration of complaints from them. In this exhibit, these zip codes, 8 out of 10 of the top 10 are located in Baltimore City, or either primarily in Baltimore City and portions of Baltimore County. One was located primarily in Baltimore County, and one was located in northern Anne Arundel County. In its report to the budget committees, PSC outlined that since calendar 2010, it has taken enforcement actions a total of 19 times against 16 different suppliers and has assessed civil penalties totaling over $2.5 million during this time. And in many cases, customer refunds to customers were also ordered in some of these cases. Most recently, 2 settlements have been reached in the past calendar year. The most recent was announced on January 11th, 2024, where a $150,000 civil penalty and $400,000 in customer refunds were ordered to be paid by a supplier. For additional context, Exhibit 10 on page 15 provides data reported by the PSC on third-party retail choice enrollment. As shown in this exhibit, the peak enrollment percentage for eligible utility customers was reached in calendar 2013 at approximately 28.1%. In subsequent years, the number of eligible utility customers enrolled with a third-party supplier has decreased in every year since over the past decade. And in the most recent month available for data, November of 2023, enrollment had declined to approximately 15%. The next issue covered in the analysis is competitive grant funding available to utilities under the federal infrastructure bill. Public Conference 56 requires that monthly utilities submit reports to the Public Service Commission since the summer of 2022 on competitive federal grant funding that they have applied for or received. Under the Federal Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program administered by the U.S. Department of Energy, also known as the GRIP program, on October of 2023, the first grants to utilities were announced under that program. This included a $33.6 million award that was issued to the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative to fund its transmission, distribution, and communications resiliency initiative, which will fund several projects focusing on improving resiliency and reliability of the distribution system in the SMECO service territory. The second round of funding under this program opened in November of 2023, and the first step in applying for this round of funding commenced in January of 2024. To date, the Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative is the only of the Maryland utilities that has received federal grant funding from this program. The final area that the analysis covers are a discussion of the current status of planned offshore wind projects off the coast of Maryland and southern Delaware. Previously, PSC had approved 2 rounds of offshore wind renewable energy credits for projects planned by both U.S. Wind and Skipjack Offshore Wind Energy LLC. On January 25th, 2024, the Ørsted company, which owns Skipjack Offshore Energy, announced that it would be withdrawing from agreements with the state of Maryland to fund its planned projects through the offshore wind renewable energy credits previously approved by PSC. Although Orsted Company stated that it would continue to seek federal approval and permitting for these two projects, and it would seek alternative financial agreements to continue with their development. At this time, the next stages in their development are currently uncertain. However, the other projects under development by the U.S. Wind have continued to advance through the federal permitting process, and it is anticipated that they could receive final approval by the U.S. Department of the Interior Bureau of Ocean Energy Management during calendar 2024. Officials at U.S. Wind have speculated that construction could proceed shortly thereafter, and by calendar 2025, initial electric generation could commence. This would note the first offshore wind projects in operation off the coast of Maryland. Finally, to conclude, the DLS recommended actions related to the Public Service Commission are to concur with the governor's allowance, and I will end my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Questions? Okay, Mr. Hoover, you're up. Anybody from your team as well? Good to see you. And for the subcommittee, Mr. Hoover is my constituent, but that will not bias me at all here.
Good afternoon, Chair Elfreth and members of the subcommittee. I'm Fred Hoover, the Chair of the Public Service Commission, and with me is Amanda Best, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary. We appreciate Mr. Quist's analysis of our budget, and we support his recommendation that you concur in the governor's allowance provided to us. I will comment on some of the issues he raised, but I may need to be a little cryptic on some of these issues because some of these are matters that are pending before the Public Service Commission. So I can't necessarily go into a lot of detail about what exactly we're going to do. But on the vacancy issue, I have been, since I got there in July, fairly active in trying to bring on new staff, particularly given our increased responsibilities in the environmental area and with climate change. Problem is, not only were you competing with the private sector, the federal government, but also a lot of the public interest groups. So these individuals that have specialized expertise in this area have been difficult to find, but we've been fairly diligent in attempting to fill these slots. I'm trying to shift the technical staff of the Public Service Commission from the traditional approach to just dealing with rate cases to being able to look at more of these policy areas, particularly related to climate change and two factors. One, how climate change affects the utilities in the state of Maryland, but also the utilities' impact on climate change. And so it's an ongoing effort on our part to respond to that. On the issue of retail suppliers, as was mentioned by the analyst, my predecessor, Chairman Stanek, started what he referred to as maximum enforcement of trying to eliminate the bad actors in the retail supply business. There is also legislation that has been filed in both the Senate and the House this year that would make substantial changes to how the state regulates retail suppliers. I've testified in support of that legislation. I think after 25 years of retail choice, we need to take a fairly detailed analysis of the way retail suppliers have been operating in the state of Maryland and possibly change some of the rules and regulations related to them. I've also had a number of conversations with the retail supply industry, indicating to them that I had concerns about how the process has been operating in this state, and particularly what was highlighted in the analysis, the so-called door-to-door solicitation of certain neighborhoods in the state of Maryland and attempting to take advantage of customers. My view is if they want to offer products that are better because of price, because of the quality of the electricity, the environmental quality of electricity, that's fine. But if they are attempting to get customers through deceptive activities, that's not going to be tolerated. The other thing that I have done is I've directed the technical staff that when they review applications of companies who want to come to Maryland and offer retail supply electricity, that they pay particular attention to whether or not those companies that are operating in other states have complaints filed against them in those states. Because my attitude is, if you're a problem in another state, you're likely to be a problem here. And so we have been very stringent in looking at that and using that as a means to not allow companies to come in here. So hopefully we can keep some of the bad actors out and deal with the ones that are already here. On the termination issue, I expect that later this year, the Public Service Commission will be examining the issue of termination policies, particularly related to the termination policies that are in effect for the summer season. Right now, there's been a longstanding attention paid to winter terminations because of the concern about cold weather. But actually, if you look at the statistics, more people are affected and are fatally affected by heat as opposed to the cold. And so I think it's time for us to take a closer look at our termination policies related to what happens during the summertime. And then the final thing on the federal funding, we have an open proceeding examining the utility companies' processes of applying for federal grants. There's lots of pots of money that are available to them. They file reports with us documenting what they've been doing. I expect that we will reconvene that proceeding and maybe be somewhat more prescriptive in suggesting that the utilities be somewhat more aggressive in seeking that money, because my thought is I'd rather have that money spent here in the state of Maryland than other places in the country. So with that, I will answer any questions you may have.
First of all, I was really interested in your point about cutoffs in the summer.
Mhm.
This suggests you believe in climate change, so there might be some differences in the summer and the winter than there used to be.
Yes, I've seen firsthand what climate change seems to, the impact it has on it. And we see it in our our town here.
Of course. No, but I never thought of it this way in terms of electricity needs. So that's really a good point. I just want to ask you kind of big picture. With the wind project, I gathered is it slowed down? Is it it's not on hold? I mean, what is it? I mean, they're looking for more money, I gather. I mean, the essence of it is they're saying, we want to do it, but we want a better deal.
Sure. Well, the problem's been this, and obviously, as you well know, I mean, I've been involved with offshore wind since its creation, and it's been frustrating because a lot of times there's been difficulty in lining up the various entities. The states were really into it at one point and the federal government was not, and that sort of slowed the process down. Now the federal government is very much part of the process and moving it forward. And now we have these economic factors that have really caused problems. Twofold. One, these projects, because they're large capital projects, are very dependent upon borrowing money. So as the cost of money went up, the cost of their projects also went up. The other thing that happened was the world events. Europe has had offshore wind for decades, and they had sort of gotten to a point where their process had kind of not come to a standstill, but they had sort of slowed it down. Well, because of the situation in Ukraine, European countries, Germany, Great Britain, Denmark, and others who have offshore wind projects already in the water and have a fairly well-developed process for developing those projects, suddenly became interested in expanding their capacity because they were tired of being, victimized by Putin.
Right.
And so literally a lot of the large parts of the projects, the larger parts of the construction projects that were supposed to come to the United States to build projects here in the United States are now being used to build projects in Europe. And so, it's been a confluence of factors that has detrimentally affected the industry. My understanding is that, the siting part, which the feds handle, seems to be going along pretty well, and the permits will be coming and things like that. So now it's a question of, can we make the finances work. There's a limit as to how much we can do because of the statute that was passed that created ORECs, but within that process, we're trying to look for what we can do. And the one advantage that we have is that we are able to consider a number of factors apart from just the price thing. So it's not like a typical utility proceeding where it's just the finances. We can actually look to the benefits that the project is going to apply to the state of Maryland in meeting our renewable resources and in providing economic development and jobs and things like that. So that helps with that. So, we're hopeful that we will get a project going soon.
But what does that mean? That's very, very, very helpful context and background. But what I'm trying to understand is, so you are in the process of trying to figure out how to make it work? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, what the companies are, we're sort of dependent on the filings by the companies that have the ORECs. And so, I fully expect to see, and we've had some filings from them looking for some sort of adjustments in what we can do. And we have a certain amount of flexibility in that area, not unlimited, unfortunately.
So just summarize my own words. So you would expect to get filings from the company saying, we want this change or that change.
Yes.
And you think you probably have the authority to do it, but you're not sure.
Well, I think we have some authority to help them out. Whether or not it's going to be enough to give them what they need to get going is the question.
And so over what period of time do you see that playing out?
Over the course of this year. So, I mean, I expect to see the filings later this year. And I mean, we meet with them all the time and they've sort of indicated to me what, kind of what the problem is. So I expect them to make more formal filings. Then at that point, there's a process that we go through to analyze that and then get input from the customer groups.
And then you go through that process, and if you conclude and they conclude you can't make it work, you come back to the General Assembly to amend the law?
Probably so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's what I'm coming my head on. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the information. We've talked about this a few times about some of the complaints, and a lot of the complaints coming from not just Baltimore City, Baltimore County, where I am.
Yeah.
And some of the top 5, 3 of the 5 are in my area, in Baltimore County.
Yeah.
And that's been our concern about those going door to door, as you've spoken. Some of these bad actors, I know they're out there. Some of the things that we know they've done, those are price adjustments, and they were major. They were literally extreme.
Sure.
Are we looking into totally eliminating these bad actors and making sure they're not in Maryland anymore? Can we do that? Is there something that we can do? I know the penalties are there, but is there something else more we can do to make sure these bad actors don't exist?
So there is this business model out there where a retail supply company will hire actually a third-party entity to, employ people who go door to door with iPads to try and sell electricity. I mean, I've find that business model dubious at best. It is apparently legal, and there is some question as to whether or not you can actually ban it. But I think what we can do, and what we are doing, is making sure that when they make the presentations, that the individual customer is fully informed about what they can do, and also, put in the ability for that customer to, not sign on the spot, which is what they essentially try to do. Yeah. And so we're trying to, through various methods, and some of it's going to be in the bills that are going to be considered this session, which will give us more tools to help enforce that situation. But we're trying to create a situation where the customer is able to make a reasoned, unhurried decision as to whether or not to do this.
And I know they do more to seniors than anybody else.
Yes.
Sure. I'm very tempted to do a town hall in my community, just to have them and maybe hear from some of the people like you, and to let the people know. I mean, I see it right here, right zip code. Yeah. How much they've taken advantage of our people, and we're seniors as we everybody else.
And I think, unfortunately, what they're taking advantage of are the demographics of the area and also the density. I mean, for them, it's very easy when they have row homes to basically go down that block and go after them. And, again, I've had discussions with the industry itself to say, look, you need to clean up your own shop, so to speak. But if you don't, we will. So
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the explanation to the question that Senator Roosevelt had regarding the offshore.
Mhm.
Folks, that's it's very detailed and we appreciate that. I represent parts of Calvert County, Calvert Cliffs. So I am highly interested in Maryland's as we're looking for renewable energies and clean energy. Nuclear, how much does the PSC and I'm not really sure, I ask everyone, so you're not the only one who comes up, how serious are we in looking at that right now? That those two reactors, they're responsible for roughly 37% of our net energy. And so I'm thinking, I really don't see it in the portfolio as we're talking about other sources. I know a few years back, Senator Miller, myself, and one of the delegates over in the House, Fisher, we asked for a study and we got that back, but kind of tails off every now and then. And we understand, to get started there, it's going to cost some dollars, but there are nations that actually operate off of that. So if there's any insights you can give us to where you all may be looking at, or just some insights period on the conception of enhancements of nuclear energy in the state of Maryland.
So I actually participated, and this was in a different job, in the relicensing of the Calvert Cliffs plant that the NRC goes through. And what came out of that was that the life of that plant is not infinite, but it actually will have the ability to operate for a fairly long period of time, given changes that you need to make to upgrade some of the equipment. But the critical factor is the containment zone, which is apparently fine. And as long as that stays fine, that plant can operate. Right now, the plant is an important part of Maryland's electric generation, which is controlled by PJM, not by us, because of what happened in 1999. And it has been able to economically participate in the PJM market, and we expect that to continue for some period of time. They've not indicated that they need any sort of assistance, from us that's been done in some other states. There has been discussion of potentially what they call sort of small scale modular reactors, which are obviously smaller than what's existing at Calvert Cliffs. And the thought is that they'll be somewhat easier to build. My only concern is that, those are just like the wind projects, are fairly big capital projects. And so some of the same economic factors that are affecting the offshore wind projects will probably affect the modular nuclear power plant projects. The other thing would be the question of where you site them. Now, one of the suggestions that's been made is to site them where current facilities already exist, because some of that work's already been done. I guess that's an open question at this point. But again, those things would be, a lot of that's controlled at the federal level by the NRC as opposed to the Public Service Commission. But right now, Calvert Cliffs, it seems to be a fairly good economic participant in the PJM grid, and I wouldn't expect that to change anytime soon.
No, and I agree with that. My question, in addition to that, is just a thought process. I mean, when we think about other modes of, getting energy, clean energy,
Sure.
We're going through the process of, Chalk Point to be closing soon, Morgantown, and all those, and what do we do in substitution? We sort of stalled with the offshore. I'm for whatever it takes, but we have and the modular. We have Western Maryland, we have other parts of the state, and so just wanted to kind of get your perspective.
Well, I think, the solution really is, and what we should learn from history is the mistakes we've made in the past have been putting all our eggs in one basket. I mean, at one point, we used to use oil to generate electricity. And then when the Arab oil embargo came along, it was like, oh my God, we got to quit doing that. And that's when we started switching to others. So then we put all of our eggs in the coal basket because there was plenty of coal around. Well, the problem is, coal causes environmental problems. So now we've sort of switched from that to natural gas. So I think that the ultimate solution is to actually have a fairly wide, diversified source of energy. And also looking at, and I think one of the advantages going forward is that the grid is sort of changing in the sense of, instead of the traditional thing of one large power plant that supplies a lot of electricity to an area, you're actually now going to be generating power in buildings, houses, things like that. It will be stored there through battery storage, and then be able to be used, when it's needed. So instead of the old paradigm where you had to make the electricity at the exact same time that you used it, you can now make electricity at a different part of the day and use it later on. And so this grid, as it gets more interactive that way, will facilitate the use of diversified sources of energy.
Got it. Thank you very much. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Chair Hoover, just a couple questions about, we've talked about this last year, and I think we're going to keep talking about it regardless of whether the bill passes on the third party. This slamming incident, I mean, it's just pretty shocking to me. Is there no mechanism for if a third party supplier comes to my door, and even if I say no, and yet they've signed me up anyway, I don't have to disenroll if I use BG? There's no check on that?
Well, actually,
action?
supposedly, I mean, this was, so when the telephone company was broken up, there used to be a problem where the competitive offering was long distance. And literally, it was very easy to switch from one long distance company to another because all you needed to give was your phone number. And what happened was, companies would call you and say, hey, I'm from Acme, telephone. And if they talked to you, they thought they got your, consent, and they would switch you. So slamming was actually put in the 1999 Act to try and get rid of that. And they thought that the solution would be the creation of this customer ID number. So everyone who has electric service has this customer ID number, which is the equivalent of a social security number.
Right.
And one of the things that we've actually advised people is when you're dealing with these door-to-door solicitors, don't give out that number, because if they have that number, that's how they're able to switch you. So, I mean, all we can really do right now is when that happens is order the customer to be sent back, offer restitution, refunds, things like that for that kind of situation. But it's, I'm not sure there's a technical fix to actually address it completely.
I hear you. I'm also concerned for people's credit scores. I mean, that's something that you can't take back if they don't know they've been signed up for something. They don't know they've missed a payment.
Yeah.
Whether they get made whole, there's still other damage created.
And I understand. And I think, in fact, my predecessor was a big fan of retail choice, but even he got convinced that this was a problem. And he's the one that created maximum enforcement, which we're now seeing the end things of. And I think that, he was correct. And trust me, I plan on continuing it until we get, the right solution. And I suspect it may be, handling some of these bad actors. And I mean, we do have the authority to pull a license. I mean, that's like the ultimate sanction that we have on them. The only thing I've been concerned about is some of these guys are located out of state. And if I pull the license and they disappear, I've actually got a whole bunch of customers who've been
service, right?
Ill-served, who are out of luck. And so I actually need them to stay around so that I can get money out of them in order to provide the restitution.
But you are focusing on the repeat bad actors. And,
Oh, absolutely.
And what more from a budget standpoint do you need for maximum enforcement?
Well, obviously our, consumer affairs division are the folks on the ground. And depending upon the legislation that's being proposed this year, actually changes the enforcement process. And what it would do is actually involve us more as sort of the cop on the beat. And if that passes, then I probably am going to need a significant increase
Okay.
in folks to help
That's what I
perform that
thought would
function.
happen. Okay.
And so now part of it is I'm trying to work with the sponsors to narrow the focus, because we don't necessarily need, the bill would purport that some of these employees of these retail supply companies would actually be licensed by us. So we would have to go through a licensing procedure to hopefully, make sure that they're, at least legitimate that they're doing. But the other part is actually relicensing the companies. The second part, I think I can do without too much difficulty. And I actually think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, right now, once they get a license, they have it until we take it back or they go away. We probably should have them renew their license in some time period, just so we can take a look at them. But the other aspect is actually licensing specific employees. If that passes, then I probably do need some more folks to actually do that part to make sure that they're doing what they're doing. And, that way we would actually be able to hold individuals, responsible who are doing these things.
So let's do this throughout the budget process. And we had the same thing with cannabis last year of working closely with the agency responsible. Let's just stay closely in touch. And so as the bill moves, I would hope it would contain some revenue enhancements for you so that you can actually implement, but let's stay in touch.
Well, actually, and one final note on that, we made a number of requests of DBM for budget enhancements that got turned down this year.
I was teeing you up for that. Yes.
Yeah, right. And so DBM informed us last week that the reason why they got turned down was that they were concerned that funding those would get us too close to the cap. So as was explained earlier, the Public Service Commission is basically funded by user fees on the utility industry. They were concerned that providing money in the budget this year with that would get us too close to the cap. So we're working on having legislation introduced this year to actually kick the cap up a little bit, to give us more headroom, to give them assurance that we're not going to be underfunding. So that's part and parcel with these other activities. So.
And so that will be a late filed bill, but is it a departmental bill?
I guess I'm still working out the details on that. So it definitely will be a late file bill, and who files it and who the sponsor is still being worked out. So
Please do me a favor. Can you just keep the Speaker's office and the Senate President's office up to date? Because I do think you're going to need alleviation of the pressure on your budget, and that could help you, and it would also help.
Yeah, although, I mean, nice thing about my budget is it's not general fund. So
Right.
I mean,
Well, it would
like I said,
also-
it is user funds.
It would also help your counterpart we're hearing from next. Okay, last piece. To Senator Stallings' point, a lot of this is going to be public education. And so if you could please make whatever consumer protection staff you have available to General Assembly members who want to do town halls, I would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been doing that, and we plan on doing that. And we've actually got we have a contract in place to redo our whole website. And obviously part of that is going to be a focus on the piece that's related to retail choice and things like that. So.
And you know where the problem zip codes are.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you haven't already, reach out to those legislators and offer to co-host with them. I think that would be a really healthy step.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Senator Rispep, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Well, I want to follow up a little bit on this bad actor thing. You made some reference to we probably can't or probably shouldn't bar them from doing this kind of hard sell marketing. Why not?
Well, my understanding is, and I've had this conversation with the Triple E Committee and ECM, is that you cannot prohibit this business model where the retail suppliers hire a third party who actually employs the door-to-door solicitors. And in fact, one of the issues had been that the retail supply company would say, oh, those weren't our employees, that was some contractor. And so, if they did something bad, not us. Now we've tried to work through that, but my understanding is that you cannot make illegal that particular process.
Based on the Maryland Constitution?
Existing Maryland consumer protection laws. So now, not to sort of punt the ball, but the agency that's coming up behind me, actually, since they deal with this all the time, they actually may have a view on this. I mean, my view is if you can, go right ahead and make it illegal, but my understanding is you can't. So
Okay, well, I'd like to pursue that issue.
No, I understand.
It seems to me we've tested this and it has not
Right.
worked.
Absolutely, yeah,
So
I agree.
Give it a
Yeah.
great chance.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Right.
one. And it just seems to me, given the evidence of the targeting and so forth, and Senator Saling's,
Yeah.
you know, firsthand knowledge in terms of his own district, it just seems to me, they're basically preying on people,
Yes,
and that should be against the law.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
so that's one issue.
Mhm.
Second issue is, do you have the authority? You have the authority to pull somebody's license. You said
Yes.
you don't want to do that because you don't want to cut off the people who they're serving. Do you have the authority to stop them from adding new customers?
Yes, yeah. So we have control over, when they come before us, if they've done bad things, we can take certain sanctions against them, fines, order restitution.
No. I'm talking about stopping them from stopping.
Yeah, and we can, move customers from them back to standard offer service. So we can actually take customers away from them if they've done these things.
Okay, but I'm asking a slightly different question.
Mhm.
Do you have the authority to say, because of your track record, you can't add any new customers? You can hold on to customers you have, but you can't add new customers.
Think we can, although I am hesitating a little bit on this because I'm trying to think of a situation where that came up.
Okay, well, the only reason I raise it is it seems to me, short of barring this kind of marketing, when you've identified people with track records,
Sure.
if you stop them from doing any more,
Yeah.
that would be tremendous protection for
Sure.
people in the short
I
run.
understand. Yeah.
And it would create a disincentive for them to stick around.
Yes.
And over time, they might say, we're going to give up on this, and they want to get people back. So
Yeah. No, I agree with you there. And
that's fine.
I'm only hesitating only because I just don't specifically know. And I don't want to say, yes, we do, or no, we don't. I mean, I agree with you. It makes a lot of sense. And we probably should have the authority if we don't have it.
Well, you might look at that in terms of
So, yeah.
legislation.
And again, you may want to ask
Yep.
the folks behind me because they may know. So.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I just want to follow up because I think they're out there, as we know, bad actors and knowing and willingly doing it at times, taking advantage. And after a period of time, having these bad actors and assessing them and having that pattern, that I believe that will be the time that you could possibly pull that, and then we can tell that, okay, these are the good actors, these are the bad actors. We're gonna make sure that people, and they can go right back to their original, I guess, if it was BG&A.
Right. In fact, I mean, the other week when we had the hearing on the bill to change some of the rules and regulations, I mean, one of the comments I made was that, there were retail supply companies that were going to testify against the bill saying, look, we're not part of the problem, we're doing that. And I said, that's probably true. But the problem is the people that are the bad actors, not only they don't pay any attention to my rules and regulations, they don't participate in this process either. So, because again, they're out of state entities and they have this, kind of mysterious presence here. So,
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hoover. And would you mind submitting the letter you sent to my office into the budget as testimony as well, just so we have that? Okay,
sure.
on the
Absolutely.
record. Okay, and then please stay a close hold
Absolutely.
on the bill and what resources you need to actually enforce that.
We will.
Okay, thank you.
you.
Okay. Final budget before the weekend. Samuel, we have Office of People's Counsel. Thank you.
Thank you. The Office of People's Counsel, the fiscal 2025 allowance totals $7.7 million, which is an increase of approximately $655,000 or 9.3% from the fiscal 2024 working appropriation. As shown on the first page of the analysis, OPC is primarily special funded, similarly with PSC, also through the Public Utility Regulation Fund. Exhibit 1 on page 2 of the analysis shows the overview of the fiscal 2025 allowance. You can see that 3.6 million of the budget is for personnel expenses. 3.5 million of the budget is for outside consulting costs. Similar to PSC, these include outside subject matter experts and consultants that assist OPC staff with proceedings it is involved in at both the state and federal regulatory level. Outside of these two areas of funding in the fiscal 2025 allowance totals about $550,000 for the remainder of the agency's operating expenses. Exhibit 2 on page 3 shows the proposed budgetary changes. First, under personnel costs, personnel expenses increased by about $118,000 overall. Outside of personnel, the other main increase in the budget is an increase of $526,000 for consulting costs. The analysis notes that this increase is related to the fiscal 2024 working appropriation, where there was a decrease in funding for these services. So if you compare fiscal 2025 to the fiscal 2023 actual spending, they are much similar in this area. Exhibit, the personnel exhibit on page 4, this shows that there are currently 22 positions funded in the 25 allowance, and that there is no change in the fiscal 25 allowance. Under the key observation section, this is a discussion of the OPC workload and staffing levels. A committee narrative in the 2023 Joint Chairman's Report requested OPC to submit a report to the budget committees on this topic due to questions that were raised during last year's budget hearings related to whether the agency's staffing size has increased in proportion to its workload in recent years. Exhibit 3 on page 6 is showing data on OPC case participations and favorable decisions for the cases that OPC has participated in. As you can see, in fiscal 2023, OPC participated in a total of 235 cases at the state and federal level, including 96 cases before the Public Service Commission. In total, this represents an increase of approximately 41 cases compared to fiscal 2022. You can see that case participation has generally been increasing in recent years. In addition to just the number of cases participated in, the complexity and scope of matters OPC has been involved in recent years has also grown. Specific examples include the introduction of multi-year rate cases for utilities, and well as changes made by Chapter 607 of 2021, which expanded the scope of OPC's statutory responsibilities to include the consideration of environmental interests of the state and the state's goals related to greenhouse gas emission reduction. Page 7 in the analysis also lists some of the state work groups and task forces that OPC has been asked to participate or has been appointed to in recent years. The next page of the analysis, page 8, goes into detail on the OPC's proposal laid out in the report for 10 additional positions to sustain the current workload as well as further enhance the agency's staffing size. In its report, OPC estimates that these positions would the total cost would be approximately $1.5 million. Further, OPC outlined a proposal where the statutory cap on utility assessments similar was raised in the last budget hearing related to PSC. The statutory cap could be raised to produce additional revenue for OPC operations. The analysis notes that in the fiscal 2024 appropriation, there was a gap of about $2 million between what the funding level was and what the total allowed revenue assessments under the existing cap are. The report further notes that due to increases in the fiscal 2025 allowance, this gap would be reduced and would be further reduced in the case of additional funding for personnel costs. The final area that OPC was asked to report on in its report to the budget committees was conducting an analysis of the budget size and the personnel size of other utility consumer advocate functions in other states. Some of the findings of OPC's analysis are included in Exhibit 4 on page 9 of the analysis. Notably, of the states that OPC looked at, the Office of People's Counsel for the District of Columbia had a budget of approximately $12.3 million and 56 regular positions, more than double the staffing size of the Office of People's Counsel in Maryland, despite in Washington, D.C. there being only one regulated electric and gas utility. On the other end of the spectrum, in the state of Delaware, the budget was $1.1 million and only 6 positions. In Delaware, there are also only 2 regulated utilities. OPC found that in the states of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, which had roughly similar budget sizes, both entities had a staffing size of approximately 12 to 13 additional positions compared to the staff size of OPC in Maryland. The last item in the analysis under recommended operating budget actions, the DLS recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance, and that concludes the presentation for the Office of People's Counsel. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Questions? Okay, Mr. Lapp and whoever from your team. Welcome and thank you for the hard work you put into that JCR. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Elfrith and members of the committee. David Lapp, Maryland People's Counsel, and with me is Carissa Rauboski, our Chief Operating Officer. We greatly appreciate Mr. Quist's analysis and we concur and are grateful for the work put into that. I'll just mention a couple things. We're involved in essentially all the work that the Public Service Commission is involved in. We get involved in. That's our responsibility to examine all those items and their potential impact on residential utility customers. But we also get involved in a couple, in a few areas that are a little bit different than the Public Service Commission. So I'll just touch on those very quickly. One, and I should say the Public Service Commission is also involved in some of these things, but maybe not quite to the extent that we do. And that one is federal work where your electric bills in Maryland, about 60% of those costs come through federal regulation, through PJM and through that are overseen by FERC. So we are very active trying to protect Maryland customers from those costs, which have continued to go up in pretty significant ways. And we are, for example, we have a vote at PJM, the regional transmission operator. We have not a lot of influence there, but we do have a vote. Relative to the utilities, our influence is pretty minuscule, but it does involve a lot of work to participate in those activities. Another thing that we do is we are tasked with investigating and asking the commission to initiate proceedings. And so we need to look not at just what's showing up at the Public Service Commission, but we have to spend resources on evaluating things that may not be before the Public Service Commission. And Mr. Quist referenced, and it came up in the discussion, PC 56, which is the commission's open docket on federal funding for utilities. That's an example of a docket that was open because we filed a petition asking the commission to open that docket. The previous commission or the commission under the previous chair opened up a limited docket. We asked for a more robust docket. Maybe we'll get that. But those are dollars that can replace ratepayer funding. That's sort of free money that can replace capital spending by utilities and really reduce the impacts that we're seeing on customer bills. But we also have filed complaints against utilities and also against retail suppliers. We've initiated other proceedings. We initiated a proceeding to examine the future of the gas industry and the ratepayer impacts of what's going on there. And the commission has opened a docket in that proceeding. The next thing I wanted to get to the retail supplier issue. There are a lot of questions about that. We have been very engaged, as you just heard, in those retail supplier cases. We've brought a number of complaints. When commission staff brings a complaint, we get very involved in those proceedings, do discovery, often put on expert witnesses, briefing, and that takes a substantial resources on our part. So we are very involved in litigating. We have a case with the commission before the Maryland Supreme Court right now. And that's a good example of a case where we have had to continue coming back to the commission and back to the courts on different issues. But that case began in 2021, early 2021. And the customers that are still being served by that supplier and paying extra high rates, those customers are still waiting for refunds. Refunds were ordered in that case, but were delayed because the commission at that time agreed to a stay. From our perspective, and this is not recent activity at the commission, but the enforcement and the remedies have been pretty lax. So when we've asked for a license to be revoked, the commission has not revoked licenses. Only in few instances have the commission ordered refunds. And again, most of this is under the previous commission chair, but we need stronger enforcement. And the commission does have authority to revoke licenses. I think the chair was referencing the dilemma that we have because sometimes the bond requirements, which we're looking to enhance, are small. And so if the license is revoked, then the company might just forego the bond and leave the state, and then that bond is insufficient to provide the customer refunds that we think customers deserve. So we need to look at it all holistically. I can address more questions on the retail supplier issue. I wanted to just get to one final point, and this is really internal. Our staff at OPC have worked. We had a massive number of rate cases last year, and we've had employees working. These are attorneys working really long hours. We have passionate, committed, hardworking staff. And I want to make sure this committee is aware of how hard they're working. This is a very specialized area of law. They've got to learn it if they don't know it when they come. And we have to work hard to retain those people because they can do a lot better outside of working for the state. So I wanted to make sure we give them credit. And then I just wanted to mention that we are hopefully going to be part of the statutory cap increase, and we're very much supportive of that and working with the Public Service Commission on that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lapp, and thank you, Chair Hoover, for staying here as well. If you could get this subcommittee exactly what increasing that cap buys you both in terms of staffing, that would be very helpful to us in helping to argue your point. And then Mr. Lapp, are you engaged on the third party? Are you engaged on the legislation before the General Assembly now?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We are supporting those efforts, and we are working with both sponsors on those bills.
Senator Jackson, and then I saw Stallings Light, and then Rose Pep.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question on the cap. That was going to be one of my questions. Secondly, you spoke of the at the bond about the enforcement, having teeth in your enforcement arm, and you said if the bonds were too low, the bad actor could just leave, and then the customer is left, short on their end. Could you elaborate on the challenges you have with that, with the setting of the bonds, and how increasing the dollar amount would keep those actors here versus them still leaving? So I guess if you could explain with that.
Sure. I think the issue comes up when we have an enforcement case and we have a supplier that we have findings for a number of these suppliers that they've violated the law. They've violated consumer protection laws by slamming or engaging in deceptive marketing practices, but they may have a large number of customers. And like with this supplier, that we have the case that they've appealed the findings all the way up to the Maryland Supreme Court, and their refunds, they told the court that their refunds would be $6 million. I believe their bond is $250,000, or that's the standard bond. So if they want to forego that bond, there's a lot of customers who are going to go without refunds. So it creates this sort of dynamic where, we don't necessarily want to revoke a license and have the company skip town and potentially avoid responsibility.
I guess it's just sort of we're sort of tied to the
Yeah.
same thing. Madam Chair, if I might. Secondly, this is very detailed, work that you do. And could you talk about the challenges of hiring and retaining folks? You mentioned it briefly, but from the investigative standpoint, of having someone to be able to, or a team of folks who could do this integral work, as well as keeping them here. And the training that's there, because I'm looking for an ask from you. What do you need to continue to enforce it? Look, the state of Maryland has a number of utilities, as we all know. And we have those bad actors that are out there, and we need for that to stop. Not oftentimes, what happens is, communities don't make the formal complaints, they just suffer.
Yeah. And
so the key is, we would certainly like to help as best we can in getting the word out, and particularly in some of the rural areas, and obviously highly densely populated areas. But that team of folks who drill down from an investigative standpoint, is there a number associated with your staffing that you need to have of investigators, or do you have a turnover issue there?
And we've outlined in the JCR, our need for more pins, for more positions. There's really two things. There's, it's very hard to find people with experience in our, specialized area and have a salary that attracts them to come to the state. But we have had success, and we've got a number of very talented, some of them, this is their first job at a law school, but they're, very good. But we have to train them. We send them to rate school, to different trainings, and then, depending on, how fast they pick things up. And we've, I can say we have a number of our lawyers have picked things up very fast, but they become more and more valuable outside in the outside world. And so it's a matter of retaining them. And there are two parts, I think, to retaining them. One is making sure that we can recognize them for their increased value as time goes on by, giving them increases. And the other is by giving them a sustainable job. And we're struggling on both dimensions of that, because we've got it's in our JCR, but a massive number of comp time hours over the last year that our lawyers, primarily the lawyers, have had to put in to keep up with all the deadlines, and really to try and not neglect some of the other more proactive work, because some of the big things that are happening may not appear unless we file something to make them appear. And that's the work that's easy to sort of drop off because we have deadlines in, sort of rate cases and other things that are sort of core to our work. So I think it's the salaries, being able to recognize and advance people along. And it's also, just having a manageable workload.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the information. They kind of hit it for me already. It's important for the salary caps. I think it's important personnel. I just think and I'm glad you're very active in knowing about this bill that's coming out. But I think more than anything, if there's something that we could do working together, adding amendments to this and make it more powerful, make it more that you have more teeth, that you have the opportunity to enforce, where it's not going to be and you won't be in position that all of a sudden this bond is not enough, but it's more than enough. That if there is the bad players or bad actors that are here, we're making sure that if it's a $10 million bond, that if they owe the 5, that they'll get it all back, or there'll be more penalties. I think having something like that is making sure that those actors are going to be good actors, and they're going to be a part of this, and that they will be profitable. They will be happy customers, and they can stay here in Maryland. But if they're not, you will not have any customers. You will not be a part of Maryland. And I think just knowing that and working together, we can have more teeth, and we can make sure that our customers are satisfied And I think it's really important. So.
Appreciate
Thank you.
that. Yes. And fully agree. Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the question that I asked Fred about. I mean, I get the issue of you don't want to pull a license, because then folks who are getting the service want to get the service, aren't getting the service. I get that. So that tool doesn't work. And then you have these bonds and they're tiny in relationship to it. So that tool doesn't work. So why, I'm trying to understand why after all this, we've heard about these issues for a long, long time. Why can't, I mean, and again, Fred was not clear the source of this thought you might be. I mean, can't we just ban this kind of high pressure marketing?
Well, I mean, the commission has authority to stop, to direct retail suppliers not to market to new customers. That can be part of a remedy, upon
Has it ever done
finding.
that?
Yes, that has been done.
And that's permanent or that's temporary?
I don't recall offhand whether it's been permanent or temporary. I think if it's going to be permanent, then we should probably just revoke that license. I'm not actually sure I understand the first point. To me, the point, and I'm not sure if I'm not understanding something,
Okay.
but the first part of that, I think the only concern that we would have with revoking a license is this theoretical possibility, but perhaps real possibility that a supplier could say, okay, you're going to revoke our license. You can have that bond, and take off. Outside of that, I don't see a reason why the commission, if the facts support it, if there are findings of violations of the law, why the commission could not revoke a license. Now, that's the most extreme remedy. So, it probably should be reserved for the egregious cases, but we have a case against a supplier we brought a case against a supplier that was found to have violated the law. Our office asked the commission, this is years ago, asked the commission to revoke that supplier's license.
Okay.
That was denied. We think it should have been granted.
Okay.
And that same supplier came back again, with complaints and a whole new complaint and proceeding. And from our perspective, it would have been better to revoke that supplier's license in the first instance. Now, that we've heard about maximum enforcement, and we're very supportive of those efforts to ramp up enforcement. But really, the problem was that before maximum enforcement, there was minimum enforcement.
Right.
I mean, there was, it was still profitable for retail suppliers to break the law,
Right.
because they'd break the law, they'd get caught, they'd get a little slap on the wrist,
Right,
but they
right.
were still making money doing it.
Right.
And so we do have to ramp up those penalties, along with a number of the other things that are being considered as part of the legislation. And also the PSC has an open proceeding where we're talking about these things as well.
Why not just ban this kind of marketing?
I think we are looking at restrictions on types of marketing. I'm not aware of any law that would prevent a prohibition on door-to-door sales, but I haven't studied that. So this is the first I've heard that there might be some, prohibition on that. With certain kinds of relief, it might be necessary for the Public Service Commission or the legislature to do a study and to understand, okay, so door-to-door sales, we have documented how they are a problem, and there's not really any other solution. So sometimes legislation needs that sort of backup, of findings to support an action. I'm not sure if that's one of those situations, but certainly the commission and the legislature can take a lot of action to prevent deceptive marketing, and the law certainly allows for that.
I get that, but I mean, just listening to all this over a number of years in much more detail this year. It just seems to me like the existing system of you shouldn't be deceptive. And if you're deceptive, we're going to try to catch you and then we're going to try to punish you. Kind of ain't working. And so it just seems like, and the targeting of zip codes is a perfect example. Now, part of that's geography, but part of that, I presume, I don't know, I haven't done the study. But I presume it's they're targeting the people who are most vulnerable to that kind of sales.
Absolutely. We think that's
Okay,
going
well,
on.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's outrageous. That should be against the law. Why do we need a study to pursue that? It just seems to me, you guys have been working on this for years. The Public Service Commission has been working on it for years.
And
This legislation this year, why not just ban it? I just leave you with that thought. I don't, you don't need an answer today. But
to be clear, I'm not saying that there isn't that authority.
you think there is the authority by the commission to ban door-to-door sales of these?
Oh, I think the state probably has that authority, but I've not specifically
understand.
looked at the law on that issue.
You're
So I
saying
want to,
you're not sure whether we
if we're talking specifically about a ban on door-to-door sales.
that's what I'm talking about right
Yeah.
now, because that
Yeah.
seems to be the essence of the problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that would be
Okay.
unlawful. And if it's and if it's because of the Consumer Protection Act, then
You change it.
you change it, right?
Could you look into that and get back to us?
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Mr. Lepp, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't read the bill, but I've read the coverage of the bill. The bill will address a piece of this, of the marketing side.
Absolutely. There
Okay.
are a lot of different pieces to this. There's the teaser rates where,
Yeah.
Right.
variable
Which
rates,
is
those are a
marketing,
big
right.
problem. There's purchase of receivables where the suppliers take on no risk by taking on a customer that is not creditworthy. That's a big problem. The commission has opened up a proceeding on that. That's part of the legislation as well. So there are multiple
Mention.
And I
problems
believe
to this. Yeah.
Senator Augustine is the sponsor in the
That's
Senate,
right.
so Senator Rosebrook, I think that'd be a great conversation to have
Yeah.
with him. Okay,
Thank you.
One more thing real quick.
quickly, thank you.
So I think one thing would be really important, and if you're doing this, it's not great, but if not, knowing these people that are coming in, their history, knowing their resume. And knowing that maybe they came from New York or Pennsylvania or somewhere, and they're coming into the state, and just knowing, their previous background, and then finding out, well, they were bad actors in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and they want to come here. And I'm hoping we are doing our homework on that. And if we are, they shouldn't be a participant here. And I think it's just an important part. But I was gonna say that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it is being looked at, and the commission, to its credit, has been looking at that much more closely. Absolutely.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Mr. Lapp.
Thank
For
you
being
very
here.
much.
And for all the folks watching at home, we actually have a respite on Monday. I think it's our only Monday off, but we are back here on Thursday. It's actually going to be a rather long day. We have WMATA, DPSCS Community Supervision, Police and Correctional Training Commissions, MDOT Secretary's Office, MDOT Debt Service, and MDOT Aviation. So be prepared and bring your lunch. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a great week.